Livingston, Montana. But they would write 2 or 3 letters a piece to each other a week sometimes. And so the correspondence is absolutely incredibly voluminous. But it wasn't just McGuane. I mean, Jim he wrote volumes of letters to the poet Ted Kooser. He wrote volumes of letters to his friend Guy de la Valdaine, to everybody. I mean, if you could just go online and you can pull up a finding aid to Jim's collected papers at Grand Valley, and you can just go down the correspondence list, and the people that he corresponded with is really unbelievable. And I don't know how he found time to do it. I read his letters. It took me months to read his correspondence with McGuane and annotate it. And you wonder where he found the time to be just so unbelievably prolific. So that was one surprise. The other was, and it's a related one, is just how many friends Jim made. Jim was a very social person. I don't need to tell you, many of you knew Jim, probably don't even need to tell you this, but Jim, for being a poet, for being so prolific and someone, by nature, writing is a solitary activity and you have to spend a lot of time on your own. And I think maybe as a counterbalance to that, Jim was incredibly social, and he as you all know, would be at the wagon wheel every day, right? So he needed this counterweight to his solitariness. But Jim made a lot of friends in his life, and tended to those friendships. He cooked with them, he traveled with them, he hunted and fished with his friends. And really, it's unbelievable how much time he devoted to maintaining friendships, and he would always make new ones. And so Jim really put himself out there from a very young age to build his sort of friend group. And he made professional relationships personal. This is the other thing. Editors became close friends, publishers became close friends, producers became close friends. Jim made friends with his psychiatrist. They would exchange recipes and, book and movie notes, and they would go out to dinner when Jim was in New York. This is a psychiatrist, so there was no one beyond, that Jim couldn't sort of collapse the professional and make it personal for him. And so those were 2 things that really struck me as surprises as I went through this process. Many more, but those are the 2 that leap out.
Well, that is a great point, because you always think when you were with him, yeah, he's kind of close to the vest, he's not. But then when I read your book, I'm like, oh, I knew that. Oh, I heard that. Yeah, Jim told. So you're right. It was like you think he's very, very private, but then he is just he's sharing and wonderful and curmudgeonly and everything. He's so many different wonderful things.
Yeah, that raises a really good point too. I was just up in Seattle, and I was with Jim's brother David, who's 78 now and lives outside Seattle, and
he looks just like Jim. It's crazy.
He looks just like Jim. Yeah. And in fact, I took a picture of David Harrison in Elliott Bay Books with him standing next to this, and David's making a face. But as it turns out, and this is entirely coincidental, but the play that you're putting on tonight here is written by Jim's nephew.
Is that crazy?
Jordan Harrison is David's son and lives in Brooklyn. And I pulled up today, I hadn't seen it, I pulled up here and I saw Jordan Harrison, Marjorie Prime, and I was like, did they know that? That's too coincidental and so wonderful. I lost track of where I was going.
I don't know.
I had somewhere I was going. Where was I going? Anyway, okay. What was I
talking about? His brother in Seattle.
Yeah, okay. I think I had a bigger point, but I wanted to get to the play and the fact that Jordan's play was playing today.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. Well, would you want to read another passage?
Sure, yeah. Be happy to.
I'll just pretend I'm driving.
Oh, I know where I was going. So I was talking about David, and David came to this event in Seattle and asked me. He said, how did you deal with Jim? Jim talked so much about himself and wasn't shy to say practically anything about himself or this and that, and I think that and wrote very openly in his memoir in many ways not though, and I think that was the point for me when I started researching Jim, is he was always so outspoken about his life in many ways, but Jim kept part of his life very private. And so I think there was this big, the big public Jim Harrison, the performance Jim Harrison, the myth of Jim Harrison, that he was only too happy to sort of perform and enjoy, as you know. But there was also a very private Jim Harrison, and there was parts of Jim that he discussed with very few people that was not public. And that was his family, his wife, other aspects of his personality. And so for me, the real challenge was to sort of get behind and around that sort of myth, and all the stories he tells, and try to get at that personal part of his life, the part that people don't know.
Yeah.
And that was really what I tried to do with the book.
I think you succeeded.
Thank you, Lars. I appreciate that. So this, this has to do with Key West. Jim went fishing a lot in Key West, as some of you know. Jim had a group of friends. Tom McGuane sort of led the way down to Key West. Tom McGuane had fished Key West a lot as a young man with his father, and went down and got a house down there on Boca Grande, I believe, and then later in Key West proper, and encouraged Jim to come down to escape the winters and come down to Key West and fish. And Jim loved to get away from Michigan in the winters, come down in the early spring and just enjoy the warm tropical weather down there. And there was a group of friends that followed Jim, and a group of friends that were going down there because of Tom McGuane was down there, including the painter Russell Chatham, who Jim met down on Key West for the first time. Jim met Guy Delavedenne, also on Key West, and both Guy and Russell. And if you don't know Russell Chatham, if you pick up a Jim Harrison novel or even a collection of his poetry, Russell Chatham's paintings are on the cover of all of his books, except maybe just a very small few. And so that's Russ. Russ was, in addition to being a wonderful landscape painter, was also a consummate fisherman. He holds world records for fishing. And somebody told me recently, they said, if you walk down the streets of Livingston, Montana, where Russ had moved, and ask people who Russell Chatham is, half of them will say he's a fisherman, and half of them will say he's a painter. And that's how much of a fisherman he was. So this has been November 1973, and it just touches on some of the shenanigans they were up to down there, but also just what it meant to them. By November 1973, Jim had cut back on his drinking yet again. He felt less fuzzy, and he had apparently lost 15 pounds. His trip to Montana in August had been the high point of his last 2 years, and it helped to sustain him through the publication of his 2 books. Now with yet another novel, Farmer, on the horizon, and a new long poem in the works, Returning to Earth, he felt a familiar unease. Dan Green of Simon & Schuster would write in the spring that he couldn't wait to see the new novel, and he was delighted that Jim was already deep into it. Fucking tired of writing a book and worrying the next 10 months how it's going to be accepted when I have no control over it, Jim had griped to McGuane. McGuane was still worried about Jim's state of mind. He would be better off back at Stony Brook, where Jim had taught or been an assistant there, than to carry on with this moroseness, he told him, adding that he thought Jim the most gifted artist he ever knew. You'd better figure out wanting to leap from the station wagon because Wanda Wandell of the New York Times don't like your novel. You have to take some abrupt, rough grips on the situation, McGuane told him. As for Jim, he desperately wanted to get back to Key West with its white sand beaches and coconut palms, and he managed to do it the following spring. Go away a few weeks, come home, and you meet your wife and figure out why you've been married for 14 years. The food is grand, the daughter's lovely, sweet, and luminously bright as the dogs are cranky and stupid. Key West, if anything, had grown wilder since he had begun going there, and the fat boys, as they were called, indulged in it all. Infamously so. 2 years earlier, Jim had confessed that he wanted his future fishing adventures to be more joyful and less a therapeutic alternative to drinking. But maintaining that level of purity of sport proved challenging, especially as the lines between nightlife and daytime fishing became blurrier. The group of friends often went fishing, well-equipped with booze packed in the coolers on the skiffs, usually a quart of rum and a 6-pack of Coca-Cola for mixing Cuba Libres. Mostly because of their proximity to Castro, only 90 miles away, it seemed appropriate, said Belden. As custom dictated, they would raise their cups above their heads before drinking. Drugs were not limited to the evenings either. In Jim's The Sporting Life, later published in Playboy, he would describe fishing 30 miles out in the Gulf from Key West near the Marquesas on a triple hit of cyclodyn and a few joints of Colombian bud. Why get freaked or tripped while you're fishing? He asked his readers. Why not? You only do so rarely. He fished to avoid boredom and the habitual, and drugs allowed him to vary the experience. Even McGuane, when he was on the island, had begun partying with the gang. With his hair grown down below his shoulders, he had adopted the nickname Captain Berserko, a sort of manner, alter ego, and moniker that speaks for itself. That same March, Valden and his brother-in-law, Christian Adasso, began filming a documentary, Tarpon, that featured, in addition to the spectacular fish, Harrison, Brodigan, and McGuane, a host of local fishing guides, including Woody Sexton, and Valden himself. Jimmy Buffett would score the film with original music. And at that time, Buffett was just, hardly anyone knew who Buffett was. He just played Sunset and played the bars along Duval Street in Key West and hung out with these guys. So Jim writes to Valden about this film. This will be a messy note because I'm thinking aloud and off the top of my head about your project. Jim had written to Valden in February. He thought they could easily put together a shooting script in a few days or evenings, but he worried that Valden's original plan was a bit too orthodox to carry the weight of an hour. The initial idea had been to have the film take place within one 24-hour period, including an arrival and departure from the island by two anglers. And that, without the filler, in Jim's words, included the whole experience of being on the island. People who fish tarpon with fly are rara avises. It's a pilgrimage, and the potentialities for the film are fabulous for presenting angling as a total experience, Jim imagined. Walking around drinking and eating in the evening is a vital part of it. Of course, you won't have any problem with the angling sequences and backdrops, the mud, barracudas, ballast, the lagoon on the Marquesas. Jim encouraged Valden to capture the melting pot aspects of Key West and the literary angle. He thought they might be able to get a few minutes with Tennessee Williams. His bigger point was that the film needed to be entertaining, and so it should begin with sharks and Hemingway. The almost overbearing macho aspects of it all are natural. Jim wanted the film to capture the real look and feel of their yearly ventures on the island. And that included the downtime, which he thought inextricably tied up with the fishing itself. Visualize Curtis, Woody, Henry Snow, Bob Montgomery, the fishing guides being filmed eating and talking about tarpon at Louie's backyard. Get them boozed up first. The experience itself is so packed that it will, with luck, take care of itself, including the boredom of the wait and the explosion of excitement when fish are spotted. No acting will be needed as the camera will be forgotten. Valden and Odasso took Jim's suggestions to heart. The resulting film, which wouldn't appear for another 2 years, was a sumptuous meditation on the beauty and fun of fly fishing for tarpon on the flats, and it's a melange of the elements Jim had recommended. Shot in the cinema verite style for which Odasso was well known, the film included stunning scenes of tarpon, quiet moments spent poling on the skiffs, interviews with guides, and recorded moments of Jim, Brodigan, McGuane, and Valden enjoying Key West. Chatham was absent that year. The film also advocated, more or less tacitly, for the group's way of fishing, a quiet, graceful, almost spiritual practice combining art with great technical skill, the long, drawn loops and silky ribbons of the fly cast, and the ethic of catch and release. This, in turn, was contrasted with the violent live bait fishing of the vulgar, tourist-ridden charter boats. The film was, finally, an elegy of sorts for a way of life, both culturally and ecologically, that was already disappearing from the Keys. Set against the backdrop of the island's backcountry and Buffett's guitar, Jim was featured as the film's sole narrative voice, and he used the opportunity to reflect on writing, fishing, and the uniqueness of his island experience. You never see a painting that reminds you of what you see on the flats, Jim says at one point, where in one day the light changes thousands of times, and it's like Brodigan said, layers and layers, strata, lamina, and blues and greens, thousands of variations on the bottom from turtle grass, the coral, to clear sand. The film, hardly ever shown and forgotten for years, enjoyed a new life many years after its creation, and it has become an unmistakable homage to the gang of friends in their younger years. Hungry, joyful, wild, and inevitably impermanent. If you haven't seen that, this documentary Tarpon has just, I think, enjoyed or is enjoying a new release. You can see it. There's also a documentary about Tarpon, which is shorter. Does anybody remember what that's called? It's called, I don't remember. But if you Google it, you'll see, or if you can look it up. But the film Tarpon's just exquisite, and like I said, it's great reminiscence of this group of friends during their time on Key West.
My God, you got a great job. Anybody else want to do that? So what's your favorite part of this whole thing?
Oh, the favorite part for me has just been getting to know people and meeting all the people in Jim's world, hands down. Meeting people here in Patagonia, meeting people in Livingston, Montana, meeting people in Key West and Michigan, and making friends and meeting people. Jim managed to pull around him an astonishing group of people as friends, as I mentioned, and people, who were very dedicated to Jim and loved him. Sometimes have very complex responses to Jim and mixed emotions, but always a wealth of emotions. And often interviews would end in laughter and tears. And Jim had that effect on people, and that by far has been the best experience. It's just the people and getting to know the people.
I agree with you. Yeah, that's wonderful. Anything else you want to talk about?
I think maybe we could open it up
For questions?
Q&A if you want.
Yeah. Wow.
It's been on my mind. I'm curious if you know why his archives went to Grand Valley and not Michigan State.
So, money. Really, I think at the end of the day, I think Jim was always, I think he was a little disappointed that Michigan State wasn't sort of putting up as much money as he hoped. There were other schools competing for it. Maybe mixed feelings about MSU generally for Jim in the back of his mind, even though he went there a number of times for occasions. I don't know that he was terribly sentimental about it. And a guy, Hank Meyer, whose family's heir to the Meyer grocery store chain throughout the Midwest, ended up buying up Jim's papers and putting them at Grand Valley State University. And Jim would go and sort of, each year he'd go to Grand